never thought I'd step foot in that house again. Growing up, I always felt like a guest there, not a daughter. My mother wasn't the affectionate type, and the place seemed designed to keep people at arm's length. Heavy curtains that blocked out the sun, furniture too formal to sit on, and a silence that felt alive, pressing against your ears. When she died, I didn't feel grief, just the weight of obligation. She'd left me the estate, and now it was mine to deal with. Mark, my husband, tried to be supportive as we arrived. The house loomed at the edge of a cliff, shrouded in fog like something out of a bad dream. "It's just a house," he said, though his tight grip on my hand betrayed him. Inside, the air was stale, tinged with mildew. We set to work sorting through decades of her life, most of it just junk. I found a few old photo albums, yellowed letters, and clothes that reeked of mothballs. But then, tucked inside a drawer in her study, I found the box. It was small, black, and polished to a sinister sheen, like it had been lacquered with secrets. Scratched into the wood were the words, "For your ears only. Choose wisely." Mark was in the next room when I opened it. Inside were cassette tapes neatly stacked, each labeled with a date and a single word: confession. My hands shook as I picked up the first one. I hadn't seen a tape player in years, but after rummaging around, I found one shoved into the back of a cabinet. The tape crackled to life, and then I heard her voice. My mother's voice, raw and trembling, filled the room. "If you're listening to this, I am already gone. And now, so are you." I froze. Her tone wasn't mournful, it was ominous, like she was confessing to something unspeakable. She started by talking about choices, hers, my father's, and how they'd shaped the family's legacy. But her words grew darker, and the first confession hit like a punch to the gut. "Your father and we took a life. For you. To protect you." I stopped the tape, my breath catching in my throat. Mark came into the room, concern etched on his face, but I waved him off. I wasn't ready to explain. Not yet. I pressed play again, and her voice continued. She described it in horrifying detail, how they'd kidnapped an innocent boy, a child no older than I was at the time, and offered him as a blood sacrifice to secure our family's fortune. "His life," she said, "was the price to bind us to the pact." I felt sick. My parents, the people who had raised me, who I had tried so hard to love, had murdered a child to secure wealth and power. Worse, they had done it for me. The second tape revealed more: betrayals, ruined lives, people framed for crimes they didn't commit. My family's success had been built on blood and lies. By the third tape, I was trembling. And then came tape 5. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The pact isn't just blood, my love. It's life for life. My death was an offering to delay what is coming. But it will not be enough. Every debt comes due. Now, it's your turn." I sat there in silence, staring at the stack of tapes. I wanted to stop, but I couldn't. I had to know the whole truth. I tore through the house, searching for answers. I found a locked door hidden behind a tapestry in the east wing. The key was nowhere to be found, so I grabbed a hammer and started breaking through. Every strike against the wood felt like I was chipping away at my own sanity. Behind the door was a room unlike any I'd ever seen. The air was thick and damp, and the walls were covered in carvings, symbols I didn't recognize but instinctively feared. Blood-stained clothes hung from hooks, and Polaroids of terrified faces were scattered across a table. At the center of the room stood an altar, its surface darkened with old blood. And then I saw the ledger. The book was thick, its pages brittle with age. Each one listed a name and a date, every victim my family had sacrificed. Near the back, I found my own name, scrawled in red ink, alongside today's date. Mark found me there, clutching the book. He tried to pull me away, but I couldn't move. "She didn't die naturally," I whispered. "She offered herself, and now it's my turn." The next day, I confronted my uncle, the last surviving member of the family. His face twisted into something cruel when I mentioned the tapes. "Do you think the wealth just appeared out of thin air?" he snapped. "Your parents started it, but we all played our part. Every deal, every success, it's all blood. You knew this." "I didn't," I said, my voice trembling. "You did," he hissed. "Deep down, you always knew." He handed me a knife, its blade gleaming in the dim light. "The pact demands a life. If you don't choose, it will take everyone you love. Choose wisely." That night, I didn't sleep. The house creaked and groaned, and shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long. And then, around midnight, I saw him. The boy. He stood at the foot of my bed, his eyes hollow, his skin pale and translucent. "Why?" he whispered, his voice fragile and broken. "Why was it me?" Mark woke to find me sobbing, but I couldn't explain. The visions grew worse as the hours passed. Blood seeped from the walls, and the shadows seemed to move with intent. My uncle disappeared into the depths of the house, his screams echoing as something unseen dragged him away. Desperate, I grabbed the ledger and dragged it to the altar. If the pact was tied to the book, maybe destroying it would end this nightmare. I lit a match and set it ablaze. The flames roared, consuming the pages, but the house erupted in chaos. Shadows clawed at me, tearing at my skin, whispering the names of every victim. I fell to my knees, gasping for air, and then I saw him again, the boy. He smiled softly, his expression almost peaceful, as he stepped forward. His small hands gripped the ceremonial knife, and before I could stop him, he plunged it into my chest. The pain was blinding, and the world spun around me. As I collapsed, I saw the house begin to crumble, its walls collapsing in on themselves. The screams of the past grew louder, then faded into silence. In the ruins of the estate, a single cassette tape survived the blaze. A stranger passing by found it, and, out of curiosity, pressed play. My mother's voice crackled to life once more. "If you're listening to this, I am already gone, and now so are you." I stood in front of the mansion, its looming, ivy-clad walls a silent testament to time. My grandfather's house, the place where I had spent summers as a child, had now become my inheritance. My wife, Clara, stood beside me, holding our daughter, Emma, by the hand. The air smelled of earth and aged wood as we approached the front door, which creaked as if it hadn't been opened in decades. The mansion seemed to hold its breath, and I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of foreboding. The stories I'd heard about this place growing up, the eerie whispers of my family's past, flashed through my mind. My grandfather was a quiet man, and he never spoke much about the family history. But every time I asked about the house, my mother would grow tense, her voice laced with a fear I couldn't quite understand. It wasn't until his passing that I finally found myself standing here, determined to uncover the truth, to find closure. We entered the mansion, the wood floors creaking beneath our feet. It looked the same as it always had, dusty and aged, yet strangely comforting. The large windows let in only slivers of light, and the old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked in a rhythm that seemed out of sync with time itself. I could almost hear the ghosts of the past, waiting for me to unlock their secrets. I began exploring the rooms, my fingers brushing the edges of dusty furniture and old photographs. And then, in my grandfather's study, I found them. His journals. Piles of them. At first, I thought they were just the ramblings of an old man, but as I flipped through the pages, I realized they were more than that. They told a story, but not the one I expected. The first journal I opened belonged to my grandfather. It spoke of family, of wealth, tradition, and the pride that came with our name. But the further I read, the more uneasy I felt. My grandfather mentioned something about a curse, something that had been passed down through generations. He never elaborated, only hinting at a horrific event that occurred many years ago. I found another journal, this one from my father. The handwriting was familiar, and as I read, I felt a sickening sense of déjà vu. My father's account was similar to my grandfather's, but it was darker. He spoke of secrets, of a family that had been tainted by something unforgivable. But again, the details were vague. And then I found the third journal, my uncle's. It was the most cryptic of them all. His writing was erratic, almost frantic. He spoke of a family history that was riddled with lies and deception, of a name that had been erased from our family tree. The family tree. I hadn't noticed it at first, but when I looked closely, I saw it. A name was blacked out, obliterated as if it had never existed. It was my mother's side of the family, a side I had never known much about. Why had this person been erased? I couldn't stop myself. I had to ask my mother. She was the only one who could answer my questions, the one who held the key to this mystery. When I confronted her, she hesitated, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. It was as if she knew I had uncovered something I wasn't meant to. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke. "They were cursed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your grandfather, your father, they all knew. It was a secret we couldn't let out, not after what happened." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What happened, Mom? What curse?" She closed her eyes, as if reliving a memory too painful to bear. "It was a long time ago, during a land dispute. My family, we slaughtered an entire village. People, innocent people. We did it to protect our land, our name. But the curse didn't end there. We had to erase the truth, to bury it deep. And we had to sacrifice the one who knew too much." I stared at her in shock, unable to process her words. "What do you mean, sacrifice?" She took a deep breath. "Your uncle, the one who disappeared, he knew the truth. He was going to tell someone, expose us, so he had to be silenced." I felt my heart pound in my chest. "But what does this have to do with me? And with Emma?" Her face twisted in pain. "I had to do it," she whispered, her eyes filled with tears. "When you were born, I knew what had to be done. I had to keep the bloodline pure, uninterrupted, to stop the curse. Your twin brother. I had to kill him." The room spun around me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My mother had murdered my twin brother? The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. "But why?" I gasped. "Why would you do that?" She clutched my hand, her grip tight, almost desperate. I had no choice. The curse was growing stronger, and now it's Emma. She's the next in line. She's the one who must be sacrificed, or the curse will consume us all. My world crumbled. My daughter, my sweet Emma. She was the one who had to die to end this twisted legacy. The weight of that knowledge settled on my shoulders like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I couldn't let this happen. But how could I stop it? How could I save my daughter from a fate she didn't even know awaited her? I looked at Clara, who had been standing in the doorway, watching in horror as the truth unfolded. She was shaking, her face pale. We were caught in a nightmare, a legacy of silence and blood that had haunted my family for generations. And now, it seemed, it was my turn to decide how the story would end. The mansion seemed to close in around me. The walls whispered secrets I wasn't ready to hear. The curse, the blood, the sacrifice. It was all too much. But the one thing I knew for certain was this. I had to find a way to break the cycle. For Emma. For our family. The funeral was quiet, almost suffocating in its stillness. My wife, Sarah, stood beside me, her hand resting lightly in mine. The air around us felt thick, as though the weight of my family's legacy pressed down on everything. On every word, every breath, every step. My estranged mother had passed away, and despite the years of distance between us, there was a gnawing sensation deep in my chest, a mix of relief and unresolved questions. We had arrived at the old family estate after the funeral, a crumbling mansion perched on the edge of the town. I hadn't been here in years. My mother had driven me away long ago with her silence and her secrets. But now, it seemed there was no escaping it. The house was cold and hollow, like a mausoleum of memories, its dark corners hiding things that I didn't want to confront. As we settled into the home, I began going through the few belongings my mother had left behind. I wasn't expecting to find anything of value, just some old furniture, maybe a few dusty pictures, but nothing that could explain the rift between us. That was when I found it. A letter. It was tucked into a drawer, hidden beneath a pile of old papers, almost as if it had been waiting for me. The handwriting was unmistakable. My mother's, though it was shaky, as if written in haste. The letter was brief, just a few lines. She spoke of a hidden chamber beneath the house, a place she claimed was never meant to be found. Her words were cryptic, but they carried an urgency that unsettled me. She said I would know what to do when I found it. Sarah and I exchanged a glance. She was just as curious as I was, but the look in her eyes told me she was also uneasy. Still, I couldn't ignore the pull of that letter. The idea of discovering something hidden for so long was too strong to resist. We made our way to the cellar. The floorboards creaked as we descended, the air thick with the musty smell of old stone. It was cold down there, colder than it should have been for a place that had been closed off for so long. We found a hidden doorway, barely noticeable unless you knew exactly where to look. It opened with a groan, revealing a narrow staircase that led even deeper. What I found at the bottom shook me to my core. The chamber was vast, its walls covered in strange symbols, faded but still discernible. The air smelled of incense and old parchment. Stacks of books, old journals, were scattered across a table, their pages yellowed with age. But it wasn't just the books that caught my attention. It was the artifacts. Strange objects lined the shelves, twisted statues, cracked mirrors, jars of something unidentifiable. It was as if the room itself had been designed to house things not of this world. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I began to leaf through the journals. They belonged to my ancestors, some dating back centuries. They detailed the family's involvement in the occult, rituals and practices designed to maintain our wealth, power, and influence. But as I read, I realized the price of this power was far darker than I could have imagined. My mother's journal was the last one I opened. Her handwriting was more deliberate here, as though she had spent years preparing to write these final words. She spoke of an ancient malevolent force, a being that had been tied to our family for generations. This force, she explained, demanded an annual blood ritual, a sacrifice, to keep the curse at bay and ensure the family's prosperity. But the curse had always come with a terrible cost. Each generation had to participate in the ritual, and those who didn't, well, they didn't survive for long. As I read on, I found the horrifying truth. My mother's death had been part of the ritual, the final step to seal the curse. She had performed the last ritual on herself. In doing so, she had ensured the force would pass on to me. I could feel my breath catch in my throat as I processed the implications. The ritual was never meant to end. The cycle was meant to continue. I had to confront my remaining relatives, the few that still survived. They had to know more than they were telling me, and I needed answers. When I arrived at their homes, they were less surprised by my discovery than I had expected. They had known all along. My family had always been involved in the rituals, and my mother had been the last to take the ultimate step. But there was something else, something I hadn't yet realized. My cousin, who had been quiet during our conversation, finally spoke. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "The next ritual," he said, "must take place soon. There's no one left to perform it. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. The ritual wasn't just about blood. It was about the ownership of the family's soul. I had always assumed that my family's wealth had come through sheer hard work, through business and industry, but it had been built on something far darker. And now, I was the one who was supposed to carry it on. I couldn't let it happen. I had to stop it. I had to end this nightmare. But as the truth began to settle in, I realized the full scope of my family's history and the even darker truth about my mother's sacrifice. She had sealed the curse, but it hadn't ended with her death. No, the curse would only pass on to me. But there was a catch. If I didn't perform the final ritual, if I didn't give up my blood and my soul, the malevolent force wouldn't just claim me. It would claim Sarah, and it would claim our child, my wife, my child. The two people I loved more than anything in the world would suffer a fate worse than death. The walls of the house seemed to close in around me. There was no escape from the legacy of blood and sacrifice that my family had created. I had only one choice. To end it, I would have to become what I had feared my whole life. A part of the curse, a part of the darkness that had consumed my family for generations. But if I did nothing, if I walked away, the force would take what mattered most. And in the end, it would take me too. The choice was mine, and as the days ticked by, I knew one thing for certain. There would be no escape from the last ritual.